Chapter 1. The Stranded. The sands stretched endlessly before Rhea, a vast, unforgiving ocean of heat and dust. Her eyes, squinting against the scorching sun that hung high in the pale blue sky, could barely make out the horizon, where the planet's endless desert met the sky in an indistinct blur. The heat was a constant companion, seeping into her bones, making each step feel like a struggle against an invisible weight, dragging her further down. Her skin was raw, burned by the relentless rays of the desert sun, and her clothes, once a fresh uniform of a junior officer in the Space Exploration Corps, were now little more than tattered remnants clinging desperately to her exhausted frame. The straps of her survival pack, which had once held everything she needed for the mission, now hung limply over her shoulders, their contents long since depleted. Water, food, everything had been consumed in the first few hours after the crash, and now, as she staggered forward with nothing left but the suffocating heat and the endless expanse of desert, the reality of her situation became undeniable. She was utterly and completely alone. The crash had been a violent, disorienting event. One moment, she had been aboard the Gallatin, a sleek transport ship carrying a group of explorers to a remote colony in a far corner of the galaxy. The next, everything had shattered into chaos. Rhea remembered the screaming alarms, the violent tremors as the ship's hull buckled under the stress of a catastrophic systems failure. The lights flickered, throwing the interior into a series of chaotic flashes, and the sound of metal tearing apart, the horrific groaning of the ship's structure, filled her ears. In the chaos, Rhea had found herself hurled forward, her body slammed into the hard surface of the cabin, and then darkness had swallowed her up. When she awoke, everything had changed. The cabin was gone, the walls nothing but twisted shards of metal and broken panels. The wreckage was scattered across the desert, a few pieces of the ship still smoldering faintly as the heat of the planet's sun continued to bake the landscape. The realization had come slowly, creeping in as she tried to piece together the situation. She had no idea what had happened to the crew. The medics, the engineers, the captain, there had been no sign of them, and Rhea couldn't bear to think about it. She had to focus on surviving, on making it out of this uninhabitable wasteland, or else the desert would claim her as easily as it had claimed the wreckage. But as the days passed, Rhea's sense of desperation had only grown. The desert seemed to stretch on forever, a monotonous sea of dunes and rocks, with no sign of life, no sign of hope. She had tried to activate her communicators several times, but the signal was dead. Her attempts met with nothing but static. There was no rescue coming. No ships arriving to pull her from the jaws of this barren world. She was trapped, and worse, she was running out of time. The sun never set here, it just hovered in the sky like a relentless tyrant, beating down on everything with its oppressive heat. There was no shade, no refuge from the ceaseless heat that scorched her skin and dried her throat. Her stomach ached with hunger, and though she had once heard that humans could survive for days without food, the lack of water was beginning to take its toll. Her mind, which had once been sharp, was now clouded with fatigue, her thoughts slow and sluggish. The world around her was blurring into a haze of exhaustion. She had no idea how much time had passed since the crash. She had lost track of the days, each one blending into the next in a haze of endless survival. The only constant was the heat and the sand, stretching out in all directions. There was no water, no shelter, no hope. Just the endless emptiness of the desert, mocking her every attempt to survive. But then, just as she thought she might finally collapse, her foot caught on something solid beneath the sand. She stumbled forward, the sudden movement throwing her off balance. Instinctively, she reached out to steady herself, her hands scraping against the coarse grains of the sand. But then, her fingers brushed against something hard, something metallic. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. Could it be? Her mind raced with possibilities. Could it be the wreckage of the Gallatin? Or was it something else entirely? With trembling hands, she dug into the sand, her fingers pulling away the grains in desperation. The heat of the desert sun made it nearly impossible to think straight, but the hope that surged through her was enough to push her to continue. She dug faster, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps, until she finally exposed a large metallic surface, gleaming faintly in the harsh light of the sun. It was a machine, an enormous piece of technology, something she had never seen before. Its surface was sleek, almost alive in the way it reflected the light, and there were intricate markings along the edges that seemed both foreign and familiar at the same time. As she examined it further, she realized with a shock that it wasn't just any piece of machinery. It was a mecha, an enormous, bipedal war machine, its metal frame built for combat, its massive legs buried in the sand. The sheer size of it was staggering, its silhouette dwarfing her tiny form as she stood there in awe. Her first instinct was to run, to find a way out of this nightmare. But then she noticed something odd. The mecha was not inactive. It was dormant, yes, but it wasn't completely lifeless. There was a faint glow coming from the cockpit, a light that pulsed slowly, as though it were waiting. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time since the crash, a flicker of hope ignited within her. She wasn't alone. There was something out here, and maybe, just maybe, this mecha could be her salvation. Desperate, she climbed onto the mecha's frame, her body trembling with exhaustion and anticipation. She reached for the hatch, her fingers trembling as she pulled it open. The interior was dark, but there was something alive about it, a presence that beckoned her forward. And then, with a final, determined push, she climbed inside. The cockpit was cramped, the controls complex and intimidating, but she could feel something in the air, an energy, a pulse, as though the mecha itself was alive. And then, without thinking, her fingers danced across the controls, trying to make sense of them. She didn't know what she was doing. She had never piloted anything like this before. But the moment her hand touched the interface, a strange connection surged through her, and for the first time in days, she felt something. Something like power, like a force greater than herself, wrapping around her. A voice crackled in her earpiece, soft, robotic, but unmistakably there. System online. Piloting interface initiated. Welcome, pilot. Her breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her. The mecha, this machine, had chosen her. Somehow, in the midst of all the chaos, in the middle of a desert planet, she had become its pilot. It had chosen her to be its partner, its controller, its link to the world beyond. Before she could process it fully, the mecha's massive limbs shifted, its enormous legs lifting out of the sand as though it had been waiting for this moment. It stood, towering over her, its sensors scanning the environment as it became fully operational. And then, in a deep, resonant voice, the machine spoke once more. Initiating travel mode. Destination unknown. Proceed with caution. And as the mecha's colossal form began to move, Rhea realized that her life had just taken a turn she could never have predicted. She wasn't stranded anymore. She wasn't alone. The mecha was not just her salvation, it was her ticket to something greater, something that would pull her from the depths of despair and into a new, dangerous world of possibilities. The moment Rhea's hand connected with the cold, metallic surface of the mecha, something inside her stirred, a spark of life that had been missing for days. As she wiped the sand from her face and continued to dig, every movement was instinctual, driven by desperation. She was exhausted, dehydrated, and sunburned to the point where every inch of her body felt like it was on fire, but there was no stopping her now. The realization that this machine might be her only hope propelled her forward. The crash had taken everything from her, her crew, her sense of safety, but now, this mecha, this colossal piece of technology buried beneath the sands, was her last shot. She had always dreamed of adventure, of exploring the stars, of becoming someone who made a difference. But not like this. Not alone. Not stranded on a hostile desert planet with no chance of survival. The Gallatin, the ship she had been part of, was gone. Her crew, most likely dead or lost to the depths of the desert as she was a memory. She had no time to mourn them. There was no time for anything but survival. Finally, her fingers gripped something solid beneath the shifting sands, and she yanked it free, uncovering a large hatch. It was a pale gray, almost shimmering in the sunlight as it reflected the heat. As she knelt beside it, breathless, her hands trembling, she hesitated for just a moment, unsure of what she was about to face. But then, desperate and with no other choice, she pushed open the hatch. The smell of stale air filled her nostrils. The cockpit beyond the hatch was dark, but there was something comforting about the way it felt, an eerie silence that wrapped around her like a strange but protective embrace. The low hum of power running through the systems was still present, faint, like the distant pulse of a heart. Her fingers, sore and blistered, brushed against the controls, feeling out the unfamiliar technology. It was foreign, unrecognizable, but somehow she knew instinctively that this was no ordinary piece of machinery. The walls of the cockpit were lined with various interfaces, strange glowing buttons, and holographic screens that flickered to life when her hand brushed against them. The metal frame of the mecha stretched upward, its towering height enough to make her feel small, insignificant in comparison. But it was alive. It was waiting. The mecha, though dormant, felt like it was on the cusp of awakening, as if something beyond her comprehension had chosen her to be its partner. With a deep breath, she settled into the cockpit, feeling a mix of trepidation and exhilaration as she pushed the large control lever forward. The machine groaned as it began to stir, its massive limbs shifting, its sensors activating, and a low mechanical hum filled the air around her. The ship's artificial intelligence, or whatever it was that powered this machine, immediately recognized her presence. Pilot registration initiated. The mecha's voice spoke, deep and resonant, a steady presence in the midst of the chaos. "Welcome, pilot." She blinked in shock. A voice. A synthetic voice that felt so real it sent a chill down her spine. Her heart raced as the realization hit her. This mecha had chosen her. She wasn't just inside a machine. She had become its partner. The feeling was so overwhelming, so surreal, she could barely process it. "Pilot Rhea," the mecha's voice came again, its tone neutral yet oddly comforting. "System online. Power levels at 50%. Tactical analysis ready." "Tactical analysis?" she whispered under her breath. "What do you mean? I'm just a survivor. I don't know anything about military systems." A slight flicker of light flashed on one of the holographic screens in front of her, and a map of the surrounding area materialized, showing the vast desert terrain with uncanny detail. The mecha was scanning the environment. It was aware of its surroundings, more so than she could ever be. "You are now linked to the mecha's mainframe." The voice continued, smooth and steady. "You are the chosen pilot. The survival protocol is activated. Prepare for engagement." The ship's legs, massive and mechanical, slowly began to lift from the sand, its weight pressing deep into the ground as the entire mecha came to life. Rhea felt the tremors of its movements reverberate through the cockpit, her hands instinctively grasping the control panel, her body leaning forward in anticipation. The mecha wasn't just a machine. It was something more. Something alive. Something waiting. "Engage primary systems," Rhea whispered to herself. The words felt foreign, strange, but something inside her told her that she had no other choice. She had to learn quickly. If she didn't, she might not survive. The desert had already claimed so much, and now, it was demanding more. With a tentative push, she guided the mecha's arms, testing its responsiveness. The mecha obeyed her commands with a precision that was almost unsettling. Every movement felt deliberate, controlled, as if it was attuned to her thoughts, responding to her as though it had always been waiting for her to take charge. The mecha's feet slowly lifted from the sand, one massive footstep at a time, until its towering form was fully upright, looking down at the desert with a new perspective. Rhea's heart hammered in her chest, not from fear, but from the strange thrill of control. She was no longer a helpless survivor on a barren world. She was the pilot of a machine, a force capable of shaping her destiny. But as she took in her new surroundings through the cockpit's expansive view, something in the distance caught her eye. A dark shape, moving quickly across the horizon. Another ship? Another hostile force? Target detected, the mecha's voice warned, its sensors focusing in on the object. Threat assessment in progress. Prepare for engagement. Rhea's mind raced. What was happening? Who else was out there in the desert with her? She had no answers, only questions. But the mecha was ready, and for the first time since the crash, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she stood a chance. Chapter 2. The First Encounter. The object on the horizon was moving fast, much faster than any creature she had encountered on this godforsaken planet. Through the cockpit's enhanced sensors, Rhea could make out the silhouette of a ship, an enemy ship, to be exact. It was sleek and aerodynamic, with sharp angles that made it look like a predator on the prowl. It was no ordinary vehicle, and judging by the speed at which it approached, It wasn't here for a friendly visit. The mecha's targeting system clicked into place, a faint hum resonating throughout the cockpit as the weapons powered up. Ria's heart raced as the proximity alarms blared in her ears. This was her first test as a mecha pilot, and she wasn't sure she was ready. But there was no going back. If this ship was hostile, it was a matter of life and death. Enemy ship closing fast. The mecha's voice announced, its tone devoid of panic but tinged with something that resembled urgency. Weapons ready. Waiting for pilot command. Ria swallowed hard. Her hands, still trembling from the adrenaline, hovered over the control panel. She had never been in combat before. Never even thought about piloting a machine this powerful. But now, with the weight of the mecha's power at her fingertips, she realized that her survival wasn't a matter of escaping. It was a matter of facing whatever threat this desert planet had in store for her. A quick calculation flashed on the mecha's display screen. The ship was moving at high speed, and from the trajectory, it seemed to be heading directly toward her. There was no mistaking the hostility in its approach. The ship had detected her, and it was closing in to investigate or perhaps to eliminate her as a threat. The mecha system's word to life as Ria's hand hesitated above the firing controls. The choice was simple. She could try to escape, but with the desert surrounding her and no clear path of retreat, that wasn't an option. She had to fight. Prepare for engagement, she muttered to herself, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. Her heart pounded in her chest as she slammed her hand down onto the control panel, issuing the command to fire. The mecha's massive arms surged forward, and with a loud, mechanical roar, its primary weapon system activated. A bolt of pure energy shot from the mecha's cannon, cutting through the air with an intensity that made the sand beneath her tremble. The blast hit the enemy ship dead center, sending a burst of light and energy cascading through the atmosphere. The enemy ship veered, struggling to regain control, its course altered by the impact. Target destabilized, the mecha's voice confirmed. Enemy ship damaged. Weapons disabled. Ria couldn't believe what had just happened. The mecha had responded to her command, and with a single shot, it had crippled the approaching vessel. The enemy ship, now spiraling out of control, began to plummet toward the desert, its descent swift and brutal. Ria watched in stunned silence as the ship crashed into the sands with a deafening explosion, sending a plume of sand and debris into the air. For a moment, everything was still, the only sound the faint hum of the mecha systems. She had done it. She had survived her first test. But there was no time to celebrate. As the dust settled, Ria's sensors picked up something else: movement in the wreckage. Someone was alive in that ship. New objective detected, the mecha's voice stated coldly. Survivor located in enemy wreckage. Proceed with caution. Ria's pulse quickened. Who was it? And what did they want with her? Her fingers hovered over the controls again as the mecha's massive foot took a step forward, beginning to make its way toward the wreckage. The desert was full of secrets that Ria had yet to uncover, and now, she had to face whatever lay ahead. The adventure had only just begun. With the enemy ship behind her and the unknown ahead, Ria steeled herself for whatever challenges would come next. One thing was certain, she was no longer just a stranded survivor. She was a pilot, a partner to the mecha, and together, they would face whatever this planet had in store. Ria's heart raced as the mecha's colossal feet crunched over the sand, each step sending tremors through the desert, the ground vibrating with the sheer weight of its movements. The wreckage of the enemy ship lay ahead, a twisted mass of metal and smoke, the air still thick with the stench of burnt fuel and scorched earth. The cockpit hummed quietly around her, the control systems still glowing faintly, an ever-present reminder of the power she now wielded. She had barely begun to comprehend how far her life had changed in the span of mere hours, but the reality of it was clear: she was no longer just a survivor. She had become something far more dangerous, something that could reshape her destiny on this desolate planet. The mecha moved with ease, its massive form gliding over the sand as though it had always belonged to the desert. It was so large, so powerful, yet so graceful in its movements that Ria almost felt like she was in control of a living creature, rather than an artificial machine. The weapons systems were still primed, but Ria knew that the battle wasn't over. The wreckage was still smoldering, and she couldn't afford to relax. There could be more threats, more dangers lurking just beyond the horizon. And now, the mecha had found a survivor, someone who, whether friend or foe, was a potential risk to her survival. Ria's fingers tightened on the controls, and she slowly guided the mecha toward the wreckage. The machines that had guided her until now were all too familiar, but the decision to approach the wreckage was something she hadn't quite prepared for. She had already killed one of the enemy's forces, and the weight of that action was still pressing down on her chest. She wasn't used to combat, to taking life so easily. The guilt gnawed at her, but the mecha, the machine, had no such moral qualms. It acted without hesitation, responding only to its directives, and now it was guiding her toward the unknown. The wrecked ship, now half buried in the shifting sand, seemed like a tomb. Its once gleaming hull was now charred, the metal twisted and deformed by the heat of the blast. Ria could barely make out the shape of a figure emerging from the debris, stumbling through the wreckage. Her fingers instinctively reached for the firing controls, but the mecha paused. The massive foot froze mid-step, hovering above the wreck. The targeting systems scanned the figure before her. Survivor detected. The mecha's voice confirmed in its calm, clinical tone. Hostile or non-hostile status undetermined. Ria's mind raced as she watched the figure approach. She couldn't see clearly from the cockpit. The desert's relentless heat distorted everything, and the shimmering waves of sand made it difficult to focus. She had no idea who this person was or what they wanted, but she knew one thing: she had to make a decision. She could kill them, just as easily as she had destroyed the ship. It was a simple thing for the mecha to do, a single command, a pull of the trigger. The thought lingered in her mind for a moment before being pushed aside. She wasn't a killer. Not by nature. She had been raised to explore, to discover, to understand, not to destroy. But then, the figure came into clearer view. It was another human. A man, hunched over, bloodied and covered in dirt, his clothes tattered and torn. His face was streaked with soot, but he wasn't wearing a uniform like hers. His eyes locked onto hers through the transparent cockpit, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The weight of his gaze was as heavy as the mecha's mechanical form towering above the wreckage. He had seen her. He knew she was there. And in his eyes, she saw the same desperation, the same uncertainty that had filled her own gaze when she first woke up after the crash. He wasn't an enemy. He was a survivor, just like her. She hesitated. The mecha's systems flashed a warning, reminding her of the danger. But still, she didn't move. Wait, she commanded softly, as if the machine could hear the doubt in her voice. Hold off. Let's see if he's alone. For a long, breathless moment, the mecha stood unmoving, a massive sentinel over the wreckage. The stranger took another step forward, cautiously, then stopped. His gaze met hers again, and this time, there was no hostility, only confusion and a glimmer of hope. It was the kind of look that made her heart ache, a shared understanding that they were both in this together, stranded in a world that didn't care about their survival. They were both alone, together. Hello. The man's voice crackled through the mecha's communication systems, a faint signal carried by the wind and sand. It was ragged, strained, but there was something familiar about it. Can you hear me? Ria's hands trembled as she keyed in the communication line, opening it to respond. I hear you, she said softly, her voice wavering as the enormity of the situation hit her. I'm alive. I'm here. For a moment, there was silence between them. Then, the man spoke again, his voice steadier this time. You're in a mecha. I didn't expect to find another human out here, especially not with one of those things. I didn't expect to find anyone either, Ria said, her voice shaking as she processed the unexpected turn of events. Are you alone? I was. But that doesn't matter now, the man replied. I don't know how long I've been out here. I don't know what happened to the others. But you've got to help me. I can't dash, he paused, his breath ragged. I can't survive out here alone. Ria's chest tightened as she realized that her fate, along with this stranger's, was now intertwined. She couldn't abandon him, not after everything that had happened. The mecha had chosen her, and now, she had to make a choice, too. She couldn't let this man die. He was a part of her world now, a living reminder that even in the harshest conditions, people could still find each other. Ria slowly shifted the mecha's weight, making her way over to the wreckage, her mind spinning with thoughts of what to do next. The desert was still an unforgiving place, and now, with two of them stranded, survival would be even harder. The man finally approached the mecha, carefully, cautiously, his hand raised in a gesture of peace. He was a stranger, yes, but they were both survivors. And for the first time since the crash, Rhea didn't feel so alone. The cockpit doors hissed open with a loud mechanical whine, and the man hesitated, his eyes scanning the open space between them before he slowly stepped inside. His eyes widened as he took in the mecha's enormous interior, the complex systems, the whirring machinery. Rhea, still seated in the cockpit, felt a strange sense of camaraderie rise within her. She wasn't alone anymore. "Thanks," the man said, his voice hoarse but filled with genuine gratitude. "I didn't know if I was going to make it out here." "We're not out yet," Rhea said, her tone serious, but there was a faint trace of a smile on her lips. "But we've got a better chance now. Let's figure this out together." Chapter 3, New Alliances. Rhea took a deep breath as she activated the mecha's interface again, her hands moving quickly across the controls as she tried to assess the situation. The new arrival, this man, whose name she hadn't yet learned, was still catching his breath beside her, his eyes darting from one part of the cockpit to another, trying to make sense of the machine around him. The mecha was an enigma, its controls strange and foreign, but it was their only means of survival now. The shipwreck that had brought her here, the hostile environment of the desert, and the isolation, all of it had culminated in this strange, sudden partnership. "You're not from here, are you?" Rhea asked, her voice cutting through the silence that had filled the cockpit. She glanced over at him, noting the grime and exhaustion on his face. His clothes were unlike anything she had seen before, patched and worn, but they had a utilitarian look to them, designed for desert survival, perhaps. "No," the man replied, shaking his head. "I'm from a colony out on the western rim. Thought I'd be back in a few weeks, but, well, that didn't happen, obviously." "You were on the same mission?" Rhea asked, trying to piece together what had happened. She knew that her crash wasn't the only thing going wrong in the universe. There were far more accidents, far more tragedies. He nodded slowly, a somber look crossing his face. "Yeah, I was supposed to be with a group. But things went south. Fast. I don't even know what happened anymore. One minute, everything's fine, and the next, we're stranded. I don't think anyone made it." Rhea nodded, understanding the deep pain behind his words. She didn't need to ask about the others. She already knew the truth. The desert didn't care about their survival. It only took. The mecha's sensors flashed to life, and Rhea shifted her focus. The desert had once again come alive with the threat of danger. She wasn't sure who was out there, but she knew this wasn't a safe place. And the man beside her? She wasn't sure if she could trust him, not yet. But they were both in this together now. There was no turning back. "Stay close," Rhea said, her voice steady as she looked out over the terrain. "We've got to stay sharp. There's more out here than just us." The man gave her a short, grim nod, and together, they prepared for whatever might come next. This was just the beginning, and Rhea had no idea where this strange, unpredictable journey would take them. But for the first time since the crash, she felt a flicker of hope. They had a chance. They were a team now, and maybe, just maybe, they could survive this desolate planet together. The mecha's massive feet shifted, and with a sudden, powerful surge, they moved forward into the unknown. The mecha's massive feet crushed through the shifting sand as Rhea guided it forward, the huge metal limbs moving with surprising grace despite their size. Every step the mecha took sent vibrations through the desert, and Rhea could feel it in her chest, the steady hum of its power reverberating in her bones. Beside her, the man who had yet to tell her his name was still processing the reality of what had just happened. The cockpit was silent except for the occasional hiss of the mecha's systems adjusting, its weapons systems primed, and the low whirring of the complex interface that seemed to have a life of its own. Rhea's mind was racing as she looked out over the barren desert landscape. It had been a harsh few days. The crash had left her stranded, fighting for survival, and now, with this new ally at her side, she had to shift her focus. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not now. Whoever or whatever was out there, whether it was more survivors, hostile forces, or something else entirely, would undoubtedly find them. The mecha had proven useful in battle already, but they were still vulnerable. "We'll need to find shelter," Rhea muttered under her breath, more to herself than to the stranger beside her. She was calculating their next move, trying to figure out the best way to stay alive. The storm is coming. What storm? The man asked, his voice skeptical, though a flicker of concern crossed his face as he looked around at the wide expanse of sand. The skies had been clear up until this point, but even to Ria's inexperienced eye, the air felt charged, heavy with a strange kind of energy. She knew the desert well enough now to sense the dangers that were building. The sandstorms here are violent, Ria said, her fingers tightening around the controls. They're unpredictable. We need to get to higher ground and find some cover. If the storm hits, it could bury us in minutes. The man didn't need any further explanation. He simply nodded, his expression hardening as he prepared himself for the harsh reality of this new world. Lead the way, he said, the weariness in his voice still evident. But there was something else there now, an understanding. They were no longer strangers in this hostile environment. They had a shared goal, survival. Ria's hands moved with practiced precision over the mecha's controls, guiding it toward a nearby ridge that would offer some protection. She could see it in the distance now, a faint outline of jagged rocks and dunes that could provide them with a momentary reprieve from the merciless sun. She focused all her energy on the mecha, feeling its power surging through her with each movement. They were a team now, linked together in a way that no one could have predicted. It was just the two of them in this barren wasteland, but for the first time since the crash, Ria felt as though they might actually have a chance. As they approached the ridge, the first gust of wind hit them. It was sudden, strong enough to send the sand swirling around the mecha's massive frame, obscuring their view. Ria's heart raced as the storm began to build, the wind howling louder, the sand stinging her face even through the protection of the cockpit. She knew they had to get to cover, and fast. Hold on, she shouted to the man beside her, though he had already braced himself against the onslaught of the wind. The mecha's feet moved faster now, its massive legs digging into the sand as it climbed the ridge with surprising agility. The storm was growing stronger by the second, the sand swirling around them like a living thing. Ria's breath quickened as she steered the mecha toward the rocks, the shelter she hoped would offer some protection. They made it to the ridge just as the storm hit its peak. The mecha's massive form huddled close to the rock formations, the wind howling around them as the sand battered against the metal. The cockpit lights flickered, but Ria held firm. She wasn't sure how long they could last, how long they could remain hidden from whatever dangers lurked in this desert, but she knew that they had survived the first battle. That was enough for now. The man beside her was silent, his face grim, but his eyes held something more, something that spoke of determination, of survival. They were both battered, bruised by the harshness of this world, but they were still here. And as long as they were still standing, they had a chance. The storm raged on outside, the wind and sand making the desert seem like an impenetrable wall. But inside the mecha's cockpit, Ria allowed herself a moment of peace. They were safe, for now. And as long as they could fight, as long as they could stay alive, they would find a way to make it through. Chapter 4, Unlikely Allies. When the storm finally passed, it left the desert unchanged. The sands had settled, the winds died down, and the sun had resumed its harsh reign over the planet. The ridge they had taken shelter behind now lay quiet, bathed in the pale light of the afternoon. But for Ria, the silence was a reminder that they couldn't afford to rest for long. The desert might be still for now, but its dangers were ever present. The man beside her was looking out over the ridge, his face set in concentration as he surveyed the land. This place is hell, he muttered, more to himself than to her. But Ria could hear the truth in his words. She didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure what there was to say. She hadn't grown up in a world where survival meant fighting tooth and nail every day just to stay alive. But now, she had no choice. She had to adapt, and quickly. "What's your name?" Ria asked, her voice steady, cutting through the quiet that had settled over them. She realized now that she had no idea who this person was, where he had come from, or why he had ended up stranded on the same planet as her. But they had to work together, and in order to do that, she needed to know more about him. The man turned to look at her, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if considering the question. He was a tall figure, older than Ria, with a weathered face that spoke of hard experience. His clothes were functional, worn from days or perhaps weeks of exposure to the harsh desert. "Jace," he said simply, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm Jace." "Ria," she replied, offering him a small nod. It was strange, introducing herself in such a place, under such circumstances. In another life, she might have been part of an exploration team, a diplomat, or a scientist, someone important. But now, she was just a survivor, like him. "Where are you from?" Jace asked, his gaze shifting back to the horizon. But there was something in his tone that suggested a genuine curiosity, a desire to understand the person beside him. "Earth," she answered, her voice soft. "I was on a mission. We were supposed to be exploring new systems, making contact with new worlds. I guess that's not going to happen now." She didn't mean to sound bitter, but there it was, an underlying frustration with everything that had gone wrong. She had been trained for this. She had been prepared for everything except this. Jace gave a low chuckle, the sound dry and raspy from the desert's toll. "I don't think any of us were prepared for this." Rhea nodded, her eyes scanning the vast expanse of desert again. They had to move. They had to find food, water, and shelter, or this Mecha would just become a relic, a monument to their failure. The desert was endless, and the wreckage of her ship was nowhere to be found. They were on their own. "So, what now?" she asked, turning to Jace, trying to focus on the practical. "We can't stay here forever." Jace looked thoughtful for a moment before answering. "There's a place. A few clicks west. It's a settlement of sorts. We could make it there if we leave soon." His tone was cautious, measured, but there was something in his eyes, determination, maybe even hope, that made Rhea believe he wasn't lying. He'd been through hell, and he knew better than anyone that hope was a fragile thing, but it was all they had. "Lead the way," Rhea said, finally feeling a sense of purpose. They both turned toward the Mecha, and in that moment, Rhea understood. This wasn't just a machine. It was their lifeline, their way to survive in this hostile world. The Mecha had chosen her, but it had also given her the strength to fight, to survive, to face the unknown. The Mecha's massive limbs moved with precision as Rhea activated its systems once more, its sensors scanning the terrain ahead. They had a destination now, a place to go, a glimmer of hope on this barren world. Together, with the Mecha at their side, they would push forward, no matter what lay ahead. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Rhea felt like she had a fighting chance. And so, with the Mecha carrying them through the desert, Rhea and Jace began their new journey together, as unlikely allies in a world that had already taken so much from them. But they would survive, and they would find what lay beyond the horizon.